so I brought my mower back to the channel. This is probably one of my most iconic builds here, and I decided to redo everything because I want to go faster. Basically, I swapped in an air-cooled Banshee, which makes this the third engine swap, and I just decided to go just simple, traditional. We have a chain drive all the way to the rear with the central jack shaft, and then I've done a single pipe conversion from a Banshee, which should make this thing sound absolutely insane. This engine is actually from 1973. It's an eBay gamble. I bought this thing for $300, and hopefully there's no issues with the bottom end or anything like that. But yeah, guys, I'm really excited to see if this platform has potential. I took the Banshee out to get built, and that's gonna take a few months. So in the meantime, I just wanted to have something to whip around, so I put this in here and I fixed the steering. It's actually very quick now, very improved steering. I did all this work in a week, and I decided just to time-lapse it. And so what I'm gonna do is just explain what I'm doing in the background. So let me know what you think about that style. Lately, I know I've been trying a lot of new stuff, a lot of new video ideas, and that's just kind of what you have to do in order to survive as a creator. So yeah, guys, with that being said, I guess we go ahead and jump right into time lapse, and I'll show you how I swapped this engine in and how much I actually took off this tractor. I don't even know what it's called. Is it a tractor? Is it a mower? Is it a Power Wheels? So with that being said, guys, I'll go ahead and cue the time lapse. Hope you all enjoy.
So I started by cutting the entire bottom half of this frame out. It was a little bit sad to see all my work get cut up, but sacrifices have to be made. So I left the frame all bare like this. Next step is I bent out some tubing and I'm building a custom subframe. It was way easier to just build a new one than to reuse the old one. And with this setup, I can get my AR mounts and my steering mounts perfectly aligned. So I still want to hit off-road trails with this occasionally, but the main focus is basically just simplicity and I guess reliability. For those of you that are looking to get into this suspension design and fabrication, I do have some tips later in this video, and also I'll be answering your frequently asked questions, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Heim joints are really nice for suspension design. They make your life way easier. You never have to have it perfectly aligned. And also, if you're building an off-road machine, I wouldn't stress too much about having them mirror image. They can be a few centimeters off. Because you're going to bend them, you're going to crash them. It's not really going to matter that much. I mean, if you're building a race car, it has to be precise, however, but I'm not building a race car. So here, I am reusing some of the stock bushings, and then I'm making my upper control arm extremely adjustable so I can dial in the camber and caster in case I need to. But overall, very simple suspension design. This is pretty much as light as you can have it. The front suspension and A-arms turn out absolutely beautiful. So the next step is to mount the engine. I have some pretty beefy mounts here, and if you look closely, you can see I'm using cardboard washers. So that way the engine is still very easy to get in and out, because once you weld those tabs, they shrink and it's almost impossible to pull the engine out. So I got my engine in there nice and welded. So next up, I'm cutting the rear diff out because it turns out I made it non-removable. So I cut the CV axles out, and I'm going to cut the top strut tower and the frame out. So out comes the rear diff. And what I'm using here is basically a homemade poor man's rear spool. I've used this on my 670cc Chinese buggy, and I've used this on my 600cc cross cart. The only problem on my cross cart was that I didn't tension it properly, so it failed. So this is what's going to be replacing the differential. If you're wondering what these parts are, these are 1 1/4 pillow blocks, a 1 1/4 sprocket, and then 1 1/4 Go Power Sports hubs.
that need to be machined flat on both sides, and then you bolt your 91 Miata axles and build outwards. As long as you have this spool properly tensioned, it's going to be reliable, but anything over like 75 horsepower, 80, these things start to get sketchy.
I have decided to reuse the stock rear control arms. I'm just going to move them a little bit forward to reduce the wheelbase, keep this thing small. So I got the lower mounts welded in there. Next up is the rear control arm, which I'm going to use Heim joints for to make it adjustable camber. So overall, it seems to turn out very nice.
So what I'm gonna do now, hook up the chain, and I'm still waiting on the machine shop to finish my axles. So what I'll go ahead and do is jump on to the steering and figuring that out, as well as the jack shaft and the chain, and then we could go ahead and put this engine together, have all the spare parts for it. I actually bought this thing on eBay for pretty cheap. What I'm figuring out now is the steering, so of course I'm gonna ditch the steering rack. I've tacked this mount right here to check the bump steer. So
bump steer is very bad because it makes your steering very mushy when you're going over bumps. So as it goes up/down, the spindle actually toes in and toes out. So to avoid that, you just have to trial and error and align your steering pivot point with your A-arm pivot point. It's a lot more to it than that though. You basically just have to learn how to do it through trial and error. Here I'm welding on the steering bearing to keep the steering shaft from wobbling.
So I had to aim the steering shaft in between the engine and the frame right there. That way it comes out at the right length for our steering arms right here. So I bought some brand new Miata CV axles. They're gonna bolt to here, and then I need to convert it back to the Yamaha Grizzly spline pattern. So the Miata is actually surprisingly close to the Yamaha Grizzly spline pattern, but it's not, it's off by like one tooth. So what I had my machine shop do is machine these sleeves so I can adapt the Yamaha Grizzly axle to the Miata axle. And yeah, this is some pretty beefy spacers, so hopefully it'll hold up to the power. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and trim these to length and then fit them in here.
I'm gonna use some wet rags to make sure I don't damage the rubber boots and I don't overheat the grease inside those boots. So overall this went pretty smooth. I welded them and I also did some rosette plug welds on the sleeves. So hopefully it holds. Some might ask why I don't use a 4-link setup like Rather Be Welding did, or like the ones that people use in drag racing. Well, I just want to stick with this independent rear suspension because it's comfy and it's pretty easy to adjust. I've never built anything that's 4-link, so I don't really know how to do it. So yeah, with the rear suspension out the way, it's time to mount the front shocks. So I'm gonna be mounting them basically with the engine in the way. It's gonna be kind of tricky to mount them, but I've came up with this solution to just mount them underneath the A-arm. And then I'm adding these reinforcement bars to the A-arms to keep them from folding and twisting in the event I go off-road.
So I got my front suspension configured. These are some Chinese shocks, but they do work. And then I made the steering to where there's no bump steer, so everything seems to be checking out just fine. The steering is way better than what it was last time. Now what I'm working on is making a central jack shaft to connect the engine to the rear spool, and I'm adding this this brake right here as a rear brake, and then we'll have front brakes as well. So I gotta make some custom brackets and whatnot, and then I'll be good to go. Alright guys, so I installed tensioners on the pillow blocks to keep the chains happy and healthy, and we also got some on this side. So overall I think it's a very gonna be a reliable, overall I think it's gonna be a pretty reliable setup.
So next up, I'm going to be splitting this eBay engine apart and replacing the crankshaft with my spare crankshaft, and just opening this thing up. It looked surprisingly fresh. It looked like it was a low mileage engine. So there was actually a few broken clutch plates, however, but that's about the only thing that was wrong. So the crankshaft, as you can see, had some rust on it, but it's rebuildable. Applying gasket, I'm going to put the cases back together, make sure I seated all the seals properly and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and snug all these bolts down, hand tight, let it cure, and then we're going to torque it down later. So I'm going to be running these R5 jugs, which are piston port. They have no reeds. This actually takes me back to the days when I used to work on motorized bicycles, if anyone actually remembers that. I remember I cut a notch in my piston to basically, I guess, get more air and fuel in, because those engines are piston port, they're non-reeds, and it worked out really nicely. So yeah, really glad I got my hands on that motorized bicycle kit, because if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be here right now. Made sure to check the clutch, and there were actually a few broken plates, so the two on the bottom I replaced, and I deleted the expansion rings as well. Next up, gonna put the gasket on, put the side cover on, and we're all good to put this thing back in the mower.
So I'm going to be outfitting this engine with an HPI ignition to delete the points.
So I'm going to run the old pipe from the Banshee. This is a 2-into-1, and these things sound insane, but I had to cut off the spigots and weld on some spacers to get the length right. But just keep in mind, this is the same bore and stroke as the Banshee, so it shouldn't lose any horsepower. At least I don't think so. Now, one thing I should have done is I should have actually kept the hood on, because I ended up making this thing a little bit too close to the hood, but it did end up clearing with some trimming.
Alright guys, first impressions. The handling on this thing is amazing. The one thing that I can feel that's not right is the jetting. It's extremely lean, and it's not wanting to rev out all the way. These wheels are excessively positive cambered. It's pretty weak right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and swap in some richer jets.
A few moments later.
Alright guys, so it is very rich in first gear, but once it starts getting load, it's leaning out. So what I'm thinking is I'll have to go to like a 140 main jet and then lift the clip on the needle or raise it up. That's hot. Yeah, it is actually running. Some two-stroke builders might cringe at me, but I'm a content creator. Oh yeah, that's pretty lean. We gotta get that fixed. I'll go up to a 140 and then lower the clip on the needle. Yeah guys, but with that being said, we need to find a place where we can ride this thing to its full potential, because I think this thing has 100 miles in it pretty easily. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. And then I didn't even bother mounting the gas tank because I am very behind on uploads, so I just kind of sent it.